The elevator hummed its familiar tune as David pushed his cleaning cart toward the 42nd floor. At 2:17 a.m., Pinnacle Financial's executive wing was supposed to be empty, but tonight something felt different. A faint glow emanated from the corner office where CEO Sarah Chen usually worked until the early hours, but this light seemed wrong somehow. Too blue, too mechanical for standard office lighting. David had been cleaning these floors for 2 years, invisible to the executives who treated him like living furniture. They had no idea that behind his quiet demeanor lay 15 years of military intelligence experience, or that every night as he emptied their trash, he was cataloging patterns that didn't add up. Tonight, those patterns were about to reveal something that would shake the foundations of the global financial system. As he approached Sarah's office, David noticed something that made his pulse quicken. Multiple computer screens were displaying what looked like trading algorithms, but these weren't normal market analysis tools. The numbers flowing across the screens were moving in perfect synchronization, as if someone was controlling market fluctuations in real time rather than simply predicting them. David set down his spray bottle with practiced silence and moved closer to the glass partition. What he saw made his blood run cold. Sarah wasn't alone in her office. Standing behind her chair was Marcus Thornfield, the company's chief operating officer, and his expression was one of barely contained fury. "You're having second thoughts," Marcus said, his voice carrying through the thin office walls. "After everything we've built, everything we've accomplished, you want to walk away because of a guilty conscience." Sarah's response was barely audible, but David's enhanced hearing caught every word. The algorithm was supposed to optimize market efficiency, not destroy entire economies. What we did to the Southeast Asia markets last month. Millions of people lost everything. Marcus moved around her chair, his presence looming and threatening. Those people were always going to lose everything eventually. We simply accelerated the inevitable and profited from our foresight. That's not criminal, it's evolutionary. David felt pieces of a massive puzzle clicking into place in his mind. The unexplained market crashes, the perfectly timed investment moves that had made Pinnacle Financial billions, the late-night meetings that weren't on any official calendar. It all pointed to something far more sinister than corporate success. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward into Marcus. "I'm done. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling the Securities Commission and telling them everything. The algorithm, the offshore accounts, the government contacts who've been helping us manipulate currency markets." Marcus's hand moved to his jacket, and David realized with crystal clarity that Sarah's life was measured in seconds. But as he prepared to intervene, another voice cut through the tension like a blade. "That would be inadvisable, Ms. Chen." The new voice belonged to someone David couldn't see from his angle, but the speaker's tone carried the cold authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Sarah's face went pale as whoever it was stepped into view, a woman in an expensive suit who moved with the fluid precision of a professional killer. "Agent Victoria Kane, Financial Intelligence Division," the woman said, displaying credentials that David's training immediately recognized as authentic government identification. "Your cooperation in this matter is not optional." David felt the world shift around him as he realized the conspiracy extended beyond corporate greed into the highest levels of government. Sarah wasn't just fighting her business partner. She was up against federal agents who were actively participating in financial warfare against their own country's citizens. Sarah's voice trembled but remained defiant. "You can't intimidate me into staying silent. What we've done is treason, pure and simple. We've weaponized the financial system against our own people." Kane's smile was cold and professional. "We've evolved beyond outdated concepts like national loyalty, Ms. Chen. The global economy requires management that transcends traditional governmental limitations. Your algorithm is just one tool in a comprehensive approach to economic optimization." David's military training kicked in as he assessed the tactical situation. 3 hostiles, 1 potential ally, unknown number of additional threats in the building. But more importantly, he was listening to the confession of a conspiracy that could destroy the lives of millions of innocent people. Marcus stepped closer to Sarah, his threat now explicit. "You have a choice, Sarah. Continue as the public face of Pinnacle Financial while we handle the operational details, or become a tragic example of what happens to idealistic CEOs who suffer from stress-induced breakdowns." Kane added her voice to the ultimatum. Accidental deaths in the financial sector have become remarkably common lately. Executive suicides, car accidents, sudden heart attacks. The stress of modern business leadership takes such a terrible toll. Sarah looked around her office as if seeing it for the first time, understanding that the empire she had built was actually a prison designed to trap her into compliance. "And if I agree to stay silent, then you continue enjoying the lifestyle that your cooperation has provided," Kane replied smoothly. "Your daughter, Emma, continues attending that expensive private school. Your ex-husband continues receiving his generous alimony payments, and everyone remains healthy and happy." The mention of Sarah's daughter sent ice through David's veins. These people weren't just threatening a CEO. They were threatening a mother, using her child as leverage to ensure her cooperation in crimes against humanity. David's hand moved to his phone, but before he could activate its recording function, the soft chime of an arriving elevator echoed through the executive suite. Heavy footsteps approached, multiple people moving with military precision. Through the glass walls, David could see 4 figures in tactical gear emerging from the elevator. They weren't building security or law enforcement. They were private military contractors, the kind of people who specialized in making problems disappear permanently. Kane spoke into a small communication device. "Begin containment protocol. No witnesses, no evidence, no complications." David realized with growing horror that he was about to witness the elimination of everyone in Sarah's office, followed by a cover-up that would paint her death as suicide and Marcus's as a tragic case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But he also understood that his own presence here made him a liability that couldn't be allowed to survive. Moving with the silent efficiency of someone trained in urban warfare, David began working his way through the office complex towards Sarah's location. His cleaning cart became camouflage, allowing him to move through the corporate environment without attracting attention from the tactical team that was systematically securing the floor. But as he approached the final corridor leading to Sarah's office, David heard something that made him freeze in place. A child's voice, frightened and confused, echoing from somewhere nearby. "Mommy? Mommy, where are you?" David's heart clenched as he realized that Emma, Sarah's 8-year-old daughter, was somewhere in the building. Whether she had been brought here as additional leverage or had arrived unexpectedly, her presence had just turned a complex tactical situation into an impossible nightmare. Kane's voice carried a note of irritation as she spoke into her communicator. "Why is the child here? This wasn't part of the operational plan." Marcus's response was coldly pragmatic. "Emergency babysitting situation. Sarah brought her to the office when her nanny canceled at the last minute. I told you we should have waited until tomorrow." "Complications," Kane muttered, "but manageable." The narrative simply changes from executive suicide to tragic murder-suicide. Stressed CEO kills her daughter before taking her own life. David felt something fundamental break inside him as he listened to these people casually discuss the murder of a child as if she were merely an inconvenient piece of evidence. Every protective instinct he possessed, every value he had ever held sacred, crystallized into a single burning purpose. These people had made the fatal mistake of threatening an innocent child in the presence of a man who had spent his entire adult life learning how to protect the innocent and eliminate those who would prey upon them. David's approach to Sarah's office became a carefully orchestrated assault. Using his knowledge of the building's layout and his understanding of tactical movement, he began systematically eliminating the threats between him and the child's location. The first contractor went down silently, taken from behind with a blood choke that rendered him unconscious before he could alert his teammates. David relieved him of his weapons and communication gear, suddenly transforming from janitor to soldier in the space of 30 seconds. The second contractor was more alert, but David's military training had taught him that speed and aggression could overcome superior positioning. A carefully thrown cleaning chemical created a brief distraction that allowed David to close distance and neutralize the threat with surgical precision. By the time Kane realized that her security perimeter was collapsing, David was already inside Sarah's office, his acquired weapon trained on the government agent, while positioning himself between the hostile forces and the corridor where Emma's voice had originated. "Everyone stays calm," David announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life-or-death situations. "Ms. Chen, where is your daughter?" Sarah's eyes widened as she took in David's transformation from invisible maintenance worker to armed protector. "Conference room B. She's doing homework while waiting for me to finish work." David nodded, his weapon never wavering from Kane's center mass. "Marcus, Agent Kane, you're going to walk very slowly toward the elevator. Any sudden movements, any attempts to contact additional support, and this situation becomes much more complicated for everyone involved." Kane's professional composure cracked slightly. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. This operation has presidential authorization at the highest levels of classification. Then the president is either compromised or being manipulated by people like you," David replied calmly. "Either way, it doesn't change what's going to happen next." Marcus stepped forward, his corporate arrogance intact despite the tactical situation. "You're a janitor. You clean floors and empty trash cans. You don't get to make decisions that affect global economic policy." David's smile was cold and humorless. "You're right. I am a janitor, which means I clean up messes that other people make. And you've made the biggest mess I've ever seen." As sirens began wailing in the distance, legitimate law enforcement responding to silent alarms that had been triggered during the confrontation, David realized that their window for a clean resolution was rapidly closing. "Sarah," he said urgently, "we need to get Emma and get out of here. Do you have copies of the algorithm and the financial records?" Sarah nodded toward her computer terminal. "Everything's backed up on encrypted drives. But David, they'll never let us walk away from this. These people have resources we can't imagine. Then we make sure the information gets to people who can act on it before they can silence us," David replied. "Emergency broadcast protocols, multiple media outlets, international financial oversight organizations. We flood every channel simultaneously so they can't suppress the story." Kane spoke with the confidence of someone who believed herself untouchable. "You're naive if you think exposure will stop this. The algorithm is already deployed in dozens of financial institutions worldwide. Even if you destroy Pinnacle Financial, the network will continue operating." David felt the scope of the conspiracy expanding beyond his ability to process. "How many institutions are you controlling?" "Enough to ensure that global economic policy serves the interests of stability rather than the chaos of democratic decision-making," Kane replied. "National governments are obsolete, Mr. David. The future belongs to organizations that can optimize resource allocation on a planetary scale." Sarah stepped closer to David, her corporate leadership experience asserting itself even in this desperate situation. She's describing the creation of a global economic dictatorship. They're not just manipulating markets. They're planning to replace democratic government with algorithmic control. David's mind raced through the implications. The conspiracy wasn't just about financial crime. It was about the fundamental restructuring of human civilization, using economic warfare as a tool to force acceptance of authoritarian control. But before he could fully process the scope of what they were facing, the sound of Emma's voice calling for her mother reminded him that immediate tactical concerns took precedence over strategic analysis. "We're getting the child and leaving," David announced with finality. "Anyone who tries to stop us will discover why they should have left military veterans alone." The confrontation that followed was brief but decisive. Kane and Marcus, for all their confidence and resources, were not prepared to face someone with David's combination of tactical training and absolute moral conviction. Within minutes, both were secured with improvised restraints while David and Sarah rushed to retrieve Emma and the critical evidence files. Emma was exactly where Sarah had said she would be, a small girl with her mother's intelligent eyes, surrounded by homework and completely unaware that her presence in the building had nearly cost both her and her mother their lives. "Mommy," Emma said as Sarah swept her into a fierce embrace. "Why are there loud noises? Are you okay?" Sarah held her daughter close, her voice steady despite everything she had just experienced. "Everything's going to be fine, sweetheart. Mr. David is going to help us go somewhere safe." Emma looked up at David with the frank curiosity of childhood. "Are you a policeman?" David knelt down to her level, his expression softening. "I'm someone who helps people when bad people try to hurt them. And right now, I need to help you and your mommy stay safe." Emma nodded solemnly, accepting his explanation with the simple trust that children reserve for adults who speak to them honestly. "Okay, can I borrow my backpack?" "Of course," David replied, helping her gather her belongings while Sarah secured the encrypted drives containing evidence of the conspiracy. As they prepared to leave the building, David's communication device crackled with incoming transmissions from law enforcement agencies that were responding to the situation. But his military experience had taught him to be suspicious of official channels when dealing with conspiracies that reached into government agencies. "Sarah," he said as they moved toward the emergency stairs, "we can't trust normal law enforcement protocols. If Kane was telling the truth about presidential authorization, then we don't know how high up the corruption goes." Sarah nodded, her business experience providing insight into the political ramifications. "We need to get this information to international authorities, journalists, financial oversight organizations in multiple countries simultaneously. Creates so much exposure that it becomes impossible to suppress." David felt a grudging admiration for her strategic thinking even under extreme pressure. "Emergency broadcast protocols it is. But first, we need to get to a secure location where we can coordinate the information release without being tracked or intercepted." The escape from Pinnacle Financial became a carefully orchestrated evasion operation, with David using his knowledge of urban terrain and surveillance countermeasures to guide Sarah and Emma through the city's infrastructure toward a safe house that existed only in his memory, a place he had prepared years ago for emergencies he had hoped would never come. But as they moved through the darkened streets, David couldn't shake the feeling that their victory tonight was only the beginning of a much larger battle. Kane's confident assertions about the scope of the conspiracy suggested that Pinnacle Financial was just one node in a network that spanned continents and governments. The real fight for the future of human freedom was just beginning, and David found himself wondering whether a former soldier, a corporate executive, and an 8-year-old girl could really make a difference against an enemy with seemingly unlimited resources and reach. But as he looked at Emma's trusting face and Sarah's determined expression, David realized that sometimes the most powerful weapon against overwhelming odds was simply the decision to fight back, regardless of the consequences. The algorithm might be able to predict market movements and manipulate global economics, but couldn't account for the unpredictable power of people who refused to accept that their freedom was negotiable. And in that refusal lay the seed of hope for a future where technology served humanity rather than enslaving it. The safe house David led them to was an abandoned subway maintenance facility that had been decommissioned years ago, but still maintained power and network connections through overlooked utility lines. As they descended into the underground chamber, Emma clutched her mother's hand tightly, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and adventure. "This is like a secret base," Emma whispered, her voice echoing in the concrete space. David activated emergency lighting that cast harsh shadows on the walls lined with outdated electrical panels and forgotten maintenance equipment. Sometimes the best hiding places are the ones everyone has forgotten exist. Sarah set up her laptop on a makeshift table constructed from a maintenance crate, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she began accessing the encrypted files they had retrieved from Pinnacle Financial. What appeared on the screen made her breath catch in her throat. "David, this is worse than we thought. The algorithm isn't just controlling market fluctuations. It's been used to trigger every major economic crisis of the last decade. The housing collapse, the European debt crisis, even the cryptocurrency crash that wiped out millions of small investors." David leaned over her shoulder, studying the data with the analytical mind that had made him valuable in military intelligence. Look at the timing patterns. Each crisis was preceded by massive short positions taken by a network of shell companies. They weren't just predicting market crashes, they were causing them and profiting from the destruction. Emma, who had been quietly drawing in her sketchbook while the adults worked, looked up with the clarity that only children possess. Are these the bad people who try to steal money from families? Sarah knelt beside her daughter, struggling to explain concepts that most adults couldn't fully grasp. Yes, sweetheart. These are people who hurt families by taking away their homes and jobs and savings. Emma's expression grew serious. And we have to stop them, right? David felt something profound in the child's simple moral clarity. Yes, Emma, we have to stop them. But as David continued analyzing the data, he discovered something that made his military training scream warnings. Sarah, these financial attacks weren't random profit-seeking. Look at the geographic patterns. They systematically targeted countries that were moving toward greater economic independence or resisting globalization pressures. Sarah's corporate experience allowed her to see the implications immediately. Economic warfare. They've been using market manipulation as a weapon to force political compliance from sovereign nations. David nodded grimly. And if Kane was telling the truth about presidential authorization, it means our own government has been participating in financial attacks against allied countries. Emma tugged on David's sleeve. Mr. David, if the bad people can use computers to hurt people, can we use computers to help people? David and Sarah exchanged a look of sudden understanding. Emma had just identified the key to their counter-strategy. The algorithm, Sarah said with growing excitement. If we can reverse engineer it and understand exactly how it manipulates market behavior, we can create a counter-algorithm that neutralizes its effects. David's tactical mind immediately grasped the potential. Better than that, we can use their own system against them. If they've been profiting from artificial market crashes, we can trigger artificial market recoveries that bankrupt their short positions. Sarah was already pulling up the core algorithm files, her expertise in financial systems allowing her to decode the sophisticated mathematical models. This is brilliant and terrifying. They've essentially created an artificial intelligence that can predict and control human economic behavior on a global scale. David studied the code over her shoulder, his pattern recognition skills identifying something disturbing. Sarah, this isn't just financial modeling. Some of these behavior prediction modules are analyzing social media posts, news consumption patterns, even shopping habits. They're not just manipulating markets, they're manipulating people's decision-making processes. Emma, who had been drawing while listening to their conversation, held up her sketchbook. On the page was a picture of computers connected by lines to stick figures, with dark clouds over some figures and sunshine over others. Like this. Sarah stared at her daughter's drawing with amazement. Emma, how did you know to draw it like that? Emma shrugged with 8-year-old logic. The computer people decide who gets to be happy and who has to be sad. But that's not fair because happiness should come from inside people, not from machines. David felt a chill as he realized that a child had just articulated the philosophical heart of what they were fighting against. The conspiracy wasn't just about money or power. It was about replacing human agency with algorithmic control. David, Sarah said urgently, we need to get this information to people who can act on it immediately. But we also need to make sure Emma stays safe while we do it. David's protective instincts warred with tactical necessity. The information release has to be coordinated and comprehensive. If we reveal everything at once through multiple channels, they won't be able to suppress it all. Emma looked up from her drawing. Can I help? Sarah started to object, but David held up a hand. What did you have in mind, Emma? Emma's response revealed a digital native's understanding of modern communication. I know how to make videos go viral. My friends at school showed me. If you make something that makes people feel something strong, they share it with everyone they know. David and Sarah realized simultaneously that Emma was right. Technical data and financial records might convince regulators and law enforcement, but only emotional truth would mobilize public opinion quickly enough to prevent the conspiracy's next phase. Emma, David said seriously, would you be willing to make a video explaining what the bad people are doing in words that other kids and their parents could understand? Emma nodded solemnly. But I want to tell them that we're not giving up, that good people are fighting back. Sarah felt tears threatening as she watched her daughter transform from frightened child to determined ally. Sweetheart, are you sure? This might be dangerous. Emma's response carried the moral authority that only comes from absolute innocence, confronting absolute corruption. Mommy, if we don't tell people what's happening, who will? David set up a secure recording system while Sarah prepared the technical documentation for release to financial journalists and oversight agencies. Emma sat in front of the camera with her sketchbook, her young face serious but unafraid. Hi, my name is Emma, and I want to tell you about some very bad people who are stealing money from your families. She began, holding up her drawings to illustrate her explanation. They use computers to make good people lose their jobs and their houses, and they think that's okay because they get richer when other people get poorer. David watched through the camera viewfinder as Emma explained complex financial concepts with the clarity that comes from understanding moral truth rather than technical details. Her video would cut through the sophisticated justifications and bureaucratic language that usually protected financial crimes, reaching people on an emotional level that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. But here's the important part. Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. My mommy and Mr. David found out what they're doing, and they're going to tell everyone. Because when good people know about bad things, they can work together to make the bad things stop. Sarah uploaded Emma's video to multiple social media platforms while David simultaneously released the technical evidence to journalists, regulators, and international financial monitoring organizations. Within minutes, their coordinated information release began spreading across digital networks faster than any suppression effort could contain it. But their victory was interrupted by the sound of heavy vehicles arriving at street level above their underground hideout. Through a periscope system David had installed years ago, they could see tactical vehicles surrounding the area. Not law enforcement, but private military contractors moving with the precision of a military operation. They found us, David said grimly, his tactical assessment immediate and dire. Multiple hostiles, heavy weapons, professional extraction team. They're not here to arrest us. Sarah pulled Emma close, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. How do we get out? David studied his memorized maps of the underground infrastructure. Emergency tunnel system connects to the old subway lines. From there we can reach the financial district and blend in with morning commuters. Emma tugged on David's sleeve. The video is working. Look, she showed them her phone, where her video had already been shared thousands of times, with comments pouring in from parents, workers, and families who were beginning to understand how their economic struggles connected to the conspiracy Emma had exposed. David felt a moment of profound hope as he realized that an 8-year-old girl had just accomplished what intelligence agencies and investigative journalists had failed to do for years. She had made the conspiracy's crimes personally real to ordinary people. Sarah, he said urgently, we need to keep moving and keep broadcasting. Every minute we stay ahead of them is another minute for the truth to spread. As they gathered their equipment and prepared to enter the emergency tunnel system, Emma made an observation that stopped both adults in their tracks. Mr. David, the bad people made a mistake, didn't they? David knelt to her level. What kind of mistake, Emma? Emma's smile was wise beyond her years. They thought people would be too scared or too busy to care about what was happening to other people. But people do care. They just needed someone to explain it in a way they could understand. David felt something shift in his understanding of the battle they were fighting. The conspiracy's greatest strength, its complexity and scope, was also its greatest weakness. It could only succeed if people felt powerless to resist it. You're right, Emma, and that's how we're going to win. As they moved through the darkened tunnels beneath the city, David realized that their mission had evolved beyond simple survival or even exposure of the conspiracy. They were now leading a fight for the fundamental principle that human beings should control their own economic destiny rather than being controlled by algorithms designed to extract maximum profit from their suffering. The sound of pursuit echoed through the tunnels behind them. But ahead lay the possibility of emerging into a world where Emma's simple moral clarity had begun to awaken something that no algorithm could predict or control. The collective power of people who had decided they were not willing to be victims anymore. 3 hours later, as dawn broke over the financial district, David watched from a coffee shop window as protesters began gathering outside Pinnacle Financial's headquarters. Emma's video had sparked something that was spreading faster than any market manipulation algorithm. The recognition that ordinary people had the power to demand better from the systems that governed their lives. Sarah sat beside him, monitoring news feeds that showed similar protests beginning in major cities around the world. "It's working, David. The story is too big to suppress now." Emma colored quietly at their table, occasionally looking up to wave at protesters outside who recognized her from the viral video. "Mr. David, are we going to be okay?" David looked at the determined faces of the people gathering in the street, then back at Emma's trusting eyes. "Yes, Emma, we're going to be okay. All of us." The conspiracy that had seemed unstoppable just hours ago was now facing something it had never anticipated. Millions of people who understood exactly what was being done to them and had decided they weren't going to accept it anymore. And at the center of that awakening was an 8-year-old girl who had looked at the most sophisticated financial weapons ever created and seen them for what they really were, tools used by bullies who thought they could steal from people without consequences. As sirens wailed in the distance and the protests grew larger, David realized that Emma had been right about everything. Sometimes the most powerful force in the world was simply people deciding to care about each other and refusing to let bad things happen without a fight. The algorithm might be able to predict market movements, but it couldn't predict the power of a child's moral clarity to change the world.